Hello, let's talk about the way I talk. And what I mean by that is, obviously I'm speaking the English language. If you don't know, yeah, I am speaking English. Not Scots, although that is the closest language to English. Some people don't consider it like a different language, but it is. I mean, it's enough that it pretty much is its own language. Like there's enough differences to say yeah, it's its own language. It's like saying basically they're the Portuguese to our Spanish. Basically, it's like a Portuguese to Spanish kind of situation where uh they're kind of like our Portuguese, where they can understand you better, but you can't understand them much. But don't get me wrong, there's still barriers both ways. It's easier for a Portuguese speaker to understand a Spanish speaker more than it is a Spanish speaker, or in this case, an English speaker, to understand a Scots speaker. And that is because Scots is not as taught as much and it's not as massive as much, because speaking English and speaking Scots is indigenous to the UK. Okay? People try to say, oh yeah, it's a global language. People try to say, oh, it's like this Creole language that was made up by the French. First of all, it's not really French. And second of all, yeah, it does have French words in it, but that's because the languages are similar in a certain way. That's what they're related to. It's kind of like having similars between you and your relative. It just is. And then three, yeah, there are indigenous people to the UK. They have white skin, but they act differently. They look differently. There's the ethnicity of like Scots and English people, but there's also the nationality and things like that. And yes, they are that way. Believe that or not, okay? So are the Irish. The Irish are their own thing too, and they have their own language. And then there's Welsh. Welsh is like a very thriving language. It's very odd. Well, anyway, what does this have to do with me? What does this have to do with me talking? Well, eventually, English came to dominate. It ended up dominating so much so that I speak English as a first language, as my native language. And when it means native language, it means the language that you were, the first language that you are a part of, like the language you understand the most, generally speaking, in the way of like, that was the first language you learned in life, before any other human language, that kind of thing. But it is whatever, it's Babel. I guess you could say it's Babel time. Babel. Oh, but I don't know if that story is exactly true. But hey, you gotta explain languages somehow, I guess. Anyway, yeah, I speak English, obviously. But another thing is I have a dialect of English. Because English, I do have a thing that English might exist in the next 1,000 years. Next 1,000 or maybe even 10,000 years from now. It will most likely still exist. It just won't exist in the sense of like, well, it won't exist in the sense of it would be the most dominant speaking. There will probably be still native speakers of English. It just probably won't be like the most dominant language in the world. It's like finding out there are, German speakers in Africa. Native German speakers in Africa. It's just a bit odd. It still exists, just a bit odd. Like that's just how it is. Anyway, yeah, I don't like English might become a minority language in the future, but I really doubt that it will completely go away. It will probably just go away enough that, that being like speaking English is probably going to just be mostly associated with uh, maybe even the United States, because sometimes the language of where it was originally native to might not end up being the language that is spoken in where it originally is from. But generally speaking, if a language were to die out like that, it would usually just be mostly in wherever it's native or indigenous to, as they say these days. And yeah, um, I speak a certain dialect, and if you're not an English speaker, or if you are an English speaker, you probably don't completely recognize my dialect. It's probably somewhere in the English speaking world, and you know it because, well, I'm an English speaker. But the thing is that I'm from the United States of America, and because of my accent, I get often confused for Canadians. I'm not kidding. I literally get people who come up to me and like, "Why are you in America?" I'm not joking. Like, they literally think I'm Canadian. I've never been to Canada, let alone like I've never really stepped foot. I've been close to the border in the sense of like I've been in Detroit before, but like I've never actually gone to Canada. Like, I've never stepped foot in that country, let alone be a Canadian, because how could I be a Canadian if I was never Canadian to begin with? You know? Like, like, what are you talking about? They assume I'm the red white. No, I'm the red, white, and blue. Okay? I'm just not red and white, because that would make me either Turkish or a Canadian. And I'm neither. you know? Turkish, Canadian, or Dutch or Japanese. I'm none of those. I am none of those, nationally speaking. Ethnically or like racially, I don't know. But like genetically speaking, I don't know. But if you're talking like nationality, yeah, I'm not Canadian. Although Canadians are very similar to Americans in general. So it's not just like, oh, because you have this one particular accent, that must mean you're Canadian. No, it could literally be anything because we're so freaking similar. And it makes sense because, one, we're literally bordering each other, but although countries can still be very different, even though they border each other. Two, both countries are English speaking dominated, so that's a big bonus. And three, because obvious reasons, we're religiously similar. With Christianity, I don't know which groups we're specifically, but we're similar in that regard. But we're not the same, if they are religious. But it's like they're mostly Christian dominated. But the what do you call it? The what's the word? Not sect, but I mean sect, but I mean like what's it called? Denomination. They're similar religiously speaking, but outside of that, outside of the religion, the politics are similar in a way. Not the same. But the only really major difference why the US and Canada are two different countries is because even though, we're really similar, we're just different enough to be two separate countries, because we are. Same thing with Mexico. All, three of us are just similar enough to be a different country. And Mexico is mostly cut off because they don't speak English. The majority doesn't speak English. And don't get me wrong, there are Mexicans who know how to speak English. But if you want to survive in Mexico, you have to speak Mexican Spanish, not just any kind of Spanish, that specific area Mexican Spanish, okay? Like here, you can speak English as long as you're like you say certain words a certain way, a particular way, or if you say certain words in general, like y'all or pop or soda to certain people in certain places. It really just depends on the state and where you are in that specific state and, you know, who you're interacting with. But generally, that's just how it is. I mean, you could say that for everywhere else, but for the U.S., it's really, like, specific to that area. So, you know, they're not going to really get offended if you talk differently than them. They only get offended, and when I mean differently, I mean you have a different accent, you know? It's just they get offended when it's like you're saying words that aren't a part of their way of talking. Like, you know, they don't say, instead of saying, like, I don't know, soda, you said pop, instead of saying, cookie, you said biscuit, you know? Like that kind of thing. And, like, it gets hard. It can get really hard, you know? And it's a very convoluted mess. You would think that because they're all the same language, they would completely understand each other, but no, not really. You know, it's like yeah, you speak the same language, but can you really understand each other though? Can you really understand each other though? Like it really confuses you. Like right now they're just dialects, but in a couple hundred years it could be completely unrelated language families at that point. Unrelated meaning like it's so different that you wouldn't even really think about it, you know? Like that kind of thing. That's just how it is. I don't know what else to say. It really sucks what we got here. But I hope you like that thumbnail. And also, if you want to comment on this video, it's gonna have to take you a literal week. And by that I mean, when you subscribe, you're gonna have to wait for a week. A whole week. A whole goddamn week. Anyway, yeah. I'm not exactly ending the video, I'm just letting you know. You know? I'm a bit late to saying that, but still. Yeah. It gets really, really confusing. Yeah. With the New York City accent or, say, my Michigander dialect, you know? But a more obvious, like, Michigan type of accent or, type of, what do you call it? Dialect is the one of the UP. That's the most obvious one. They're like if they took an Amish person, and made the most, like Canadian version of the most southern accent, you know? Like, the Bible Belt accent. You know what I mean? Like, that's what they talk like. And then stick a few bit of, like, Irish and a couple other, like, some words with other dialects, like the Scots or, you know, black people, that kind of thing. You just shove everything, like, sprinkled slightly in there, and then, oh, yeah, you get their accent. But they'll flatline it all in one way, so it just sounds like it doesn't really sound like a direct accent. It just sounds like they're just saying every word the same, but with their particular voice, almost. So because of it, you don't really know what they say, and if you've seen that, particular way of talking, you know what I mean. And that's just how they are. I don't know why. They talk like that specifically. Excuse me, I yawned there. But they do. They really, really do. Anyway, yeah. If you have any thoughts on it, you can, I don't know, make your own YouTube video about it or something. You could, I don't know, go talk to the sheep. You could say nothing. You could go comment on this video if you want. But remember, you have to be subscribed for a week. But yeah, I am out of here. You know, for the commenting. But like, anyway, I am out of here. And yeah, that's talking about talking. Anyway, and just remember, stay ugly.